Hello my friends, welcome to another tier list, which is my way of saying that I am waiting for a mod to be finished and it just quite isn't done yet. So today, we are going to be doing a StarCraft 1 unit tier list and Brood War, but specifically for campaign units. We're not going to be thinking about how they are in multiplayer or anything like that. That has been done a million times by better players than I. However, campaign, I know pretty darn well. And I think it's interesting how some units in multiplayer are really good and not so good in the campaign, or vice versa. So, and of course, the comparison between how good one is in StarCraft 1 versus StarCraft 2, I think is also interesting. So we are going to begin with Terran. Before I begin, I guess I should say, I'm going to be paying attention to three main things when it comes to rating stuff. One is going to be just how powerful is the unit. Two is how accessible is the unit. For example, if the unit is really, really good, but you only get to use it in 2 missions out of the 20 that your faction plays, that kind of sucks. It isn't going to put you in F tier for it, but it is probably going to knock you down a notch. And then 3, is the unit fun? And does the unit, how hard is it to use? If you need 450 APM to make this unit good, then honestly, it's not really great campaign material. Because StarCraft 1 is a very hard game anyway, and the average campaign experience isn't really looking for that. So those are the 3 things that I'm going to be keeping in mind. Of course, power is the most important of them, but they all have a weight. Now, we have the Marine as the first unit. If you have played any StarCraft 2, you know that in that game, the Marine is a very solid S tier. However, I think that the Marine is more like B tier in StarCraft 1. And that is for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's just not as strong as it is in StarCraft 2. The second is that if you want to get upgrades for it, you have to spend a lot of money. You have to get Stim Pack, you have to get the Shells upgrade, and you have to get attack upgrades in order to make them scale well. And even then, they're not scaling particularly crazy. It's not like, whoa, now this is a unit. It's like, whoa, now this is moderately viable, assuming you're playing in Brood War, because the StarCraft 1 non-Brood War Marine doesn't have medic support, and it really, really needs that if it wants to be solid. So as a result, you play through the first couple missions with Marines, you unlock some factory tech and some better units, and then you put them in bunkers. And I think that they're good in bunkers, legitimately. They're very, very reasonable to have in bunkers. As a result, I think they're B tier. They are a early game unit that does early game things, but you don't want to be making them all game long, particularly against the crazy splash damage that you deal with in Brood War. Next old unit is going to be the Firebat. Now, Firebats are a unit that are definitely better in StarCraft 1 than they are in StarCraft 2. By the way, I want to apologize for this all being asphalt background. It's just what Tier Maker had, and I didn't want to make a full tier list and get all the screenshots. That would have taken forever. So, yeah, it's not my fault, but it is asphalt. The Firebat is definitely a better unit than it is in StarCraft 2. It's cheap, comparatively. It's pretty fast with Stim Pack. It's durable-ish for what you're buying. Unfortunately, it does do concussive damage. And concussive damage is the worst damage type in StarCraft 2. Or rather, StarCraft 1. Because it does reduce damage to almost everything except for light. And the amount of reduction, like against big units, it does 25% damage, which is horrible. It's so bad. So the Firebat is a unit that you pretty much after the beginning of the campaign want to put one of into a bunker. However, they do pretty large amounts of work in Brood War when you are in no build missions with them. Because they do a lot of tanking and they get a lot of healing. Not a lot of work because there's not a ton of them, but they do better than they do in StarCraft 1, and as a result, I think they can get a C tier, simply because they are very good against Zerglings, and they do fit in a bunker pretty decently, but besides that, they're not ideal. The Medic is an interesting one, because it single-handedly makes infantry viable again for a bit in Brood War. So obviously, we cannot talk about the entire first campaign, but then Brood War comes out, medics become a thing, and Bio feels a lot better to use. In fact, the Medic is one of the best spellcasters in the game for convenience, because it's like one of the few things that autocasts, and it does its autocasting really well. So I think the medic is very nice. It really bumps these guys up in tiers. Their abilities aren't the greatest. Like, Restoration is pretty nice sometimes if you can remember to use it. Optical Flare is very niche. But I think that simply because it enables an entire playstyle that was very bad before, I gotta put it in A tier. The Ghost, on the other hand, is an interesting one, because it is expensive. It costs 25 minerals and 75 gas. The gas is pretty high. It's not as expensive as StarCraft 2, obviously, but it does very, very bad damage. It has basically no hit points. Lockdown is a good ability if you have the APM to use it, and that's about it. However, I still think that it deserves a reasonable B tier simply because nukes are very, very good. If you want to focus on a nuke-based playstyle, the Ghost is very viable for it. They're not as good as StarCraft 2 nukes, because they cost a lot, they take a lot of supply, and they have to be built on the Command Center add-on, which means it's much more difficult to get them in scale. But whoa, buddy, are nuclear bombs very good at clearing an area, so that alone is really pulling them up. Plus, if you do have the mechanics to use lockdown, it is pretty great. The Vulture is an interesting unit, because it is not as good as it is in multiplayer. The Spider Mine, when your opponent actually has to buy the things that they make, and when the opponent has to build stuff from nothing, is an incredibly oppressive unit. It makes it so hard to move around the map, so hard to expand, requiring detection everywhere. And it is still able to do that. However, the amount of value that Spider Mines get in the campaign is significantly lower, and you have to constantly be refreshing them. However, at the same time, the Vulture is very cheap, and while it does do concussive damage, it hits it does a lot of damage per shot, which makes it significantly better even with the reductions than someone like the Firebat or the Ghost, who also do concussive. So as a result, I think just for the convenience of the Vulture and the fact that you're always going to need some sort of mineral dump, and it does mineral dumping the best for Terran, I'm going to put it in a solid A tier. The next is the Goliath. I think that everybody knows the StarCraft 1 Goliath is awesome. Like, these boys are cheap. They are so cheap, they don't cost very much supply, and in the original campaign, they're okay. I would say that if it was just the original campaign, I'd probably put them in B tier, but then they get the range upgrade in Brood War, and it is crazy how strong these become. They are a unit that you can put into basically any composition, and they will provide a lot of support, get a lot of damage from behind, and just keep shooting. I really like Goliaths. The only thing I don't like about them is their pathing is terrible. They are the second worst pathing in the game after the Dragoon, in my opinion. And that definitely pulls them down. It hurts, but the amount that they do is very nice. They also hit scan, which is very, very important when it comes to killing lots of small stuff in this game because of projectiles and overkill. So they do a lot of things really well. Next up is the Siege Tank. I don't gotta say anything, dude. What do you want me to say? It's the Siege Tank. Everybody knows this. There is not a single mission in StarCraft 1 or Brood War that you have the tank unlocked where if you go for like 3 tanks first and put them in siege mode to keep yourself safe, it is the wrong answer. There just isn't. It's always good. You don't have to attack with them. You don't have to be crazy. You don't have to go like a super kooky mode, tank drops or whatever. You just have a couple of them in the front, and instantly you can do whatever you want on your own timetable, and it's going to be fine. As long as you make sure to build a couple missile turrets too. Siege tanks are beautiful. They are wonderful. I really like them. Now we have the Wraith, and I'm going to do something that is kind of bold here. I'm going to put the Wraith in B tier. I think that the Wraith isn't that bad. Specifically because the enemy is not super good at dealing with Cloak. The Wraith, statistically, is not that good. However, if you get like 12 of them, and you just click on the detection, which is not that hard, you will kill turrets very quickly, you will kill overlords very quickly, at which point the Wraith can do whatever it wants. If you get like 30 Wraiths, you just turtle them up for a long time, they will win basically every mission. They're pretty good, and flying units are just more convenient in StarCraft 1. You don't have to deal with the pathing, you don't have to deal with so many different things. They're quick, they can get home, they're good on defense, assuming that they are, that the enemy is attacking something that's not like your worker line that you need to kill really quick. But if they're, for example, attacking a bunker, and you are blasting things with Wraiths too, they really help because they don't take any damage while cloaked. I don't hate the unit. They are so much better feeling than they are in StarCraft 2. The dropship is an interesting one. I think that dropships in StarCraft 1 are fundamentally weaker than they are in the other games, simply because they're very clunky to use, and dropships in campaigns are weaker than they are in skirmish mode, because the enemy starts with missile turrets and stuff everywhere. So you have to like make an air army in order to bust down some of the missile turrets and then be able to deal with the, and then be able to drop stuff. It can be pretty powerful. However, it is a huge pain in the butt, and the number of missions where you can actually do it are fairly limited. As a result, I'm going to put the medevac in C tier, because I think it is, this isn't, decent. I'm so sorry, I had this written wrong. It is sometimes decent, but most of the time it's pretty mediocre. Now, the science vessel is another unit that I think is very interesting. For the most part, in the campaign, I'm going to rate spellcasters lower, simply because using the spells is really hard. Particularly the campaign has battle after battle after battle after battle a lot of the time. It's just like, oh, they're attacking again and again from weird angles and stuff, and just getting the spellcasters to work can be a pain. However, if you can ever precast things, instead of in the heat of the moment, if you can just do stuff beforehand and then go, then I think the spellcaster is much better. And that is one of the things that the science vessel can do. First of all, it's flying, which is very nice, and it's pretty durable, so it doesn't die super easy. But the fact that you can defensive matrix before you attack into the enemy, and you don't have to do it during the fight, makes the spell so much better for the average player. And I think that it deserves a solid B tier there. In addition, it has the nice amount of detection. There's a lot of random burrow Zerg stuff. You don't really get hit by that many cloaked Protoss or Terran, but it does happen. And as a result, having vessels is always nice, and they're fairly easy to use. You just defense matrix the things you need beforehand, the spell lasts for quite a long time, and then you just set them on follow. Or you can even leave them in the back some of the time if there's no cloakers. And it just works out. Good unit. The Valkyrie, was the unit that was put in the game to counter big stacks of units, right? In multiplayer, the enemies can stack up a bunch of air units on top of each other, make a giant death shadow of doom and demise, and then harass you to death. And the Valkyrie was one of the units that was added to counter that. That doesn't really come up in the campaign. It just really doesn't. And the amount of damage that the Valkyrie does is very low. It's not good at like fighting 1v1s. It is pretty durable, but it just lacks tactical flexibility, and you also get it very late into the campaign. As a result, those opportunities do not really arise, and I'm going to put it in C tier. It does the one thing pretty well, but that one thing is very rare. Battlecruiser. The Battlecruiser, oh gosh, where do we put the Battlecruiser? I want to put it in S tier, because it's insane. 12 Battlecruisers beat every mission in StarCraft 1 and in Brood War. You kind of get it early though, actually. You get like 3 missions out of 10 in the first campaign that you can use Battlecruisers, and I think in the Terran campaign you get them as well, and you get them when you're playing Protoss on that final mission against the Overmind. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to put it in S tier. I think that the StarCraft 1 Battlecruiser is far better than the StarCraft 2 Battlecruiser when it comes to just maxing and being the fleet commander. They just roll over everything. The only thing that they're really vulnerable to is being hit by like a bunch of plagues, which doesn't happen that often, and it'll be fine, don't worry about it. Yeah, this looks pretty good for all the Terran units so far. I think that is super, super solid. The Zergling is a very interesting one. Because if you were playing StarCraft 2, or rather StarCraft 1 competitive, the Zergling would be a very reasonable S tier. It is one of the best units in the game, except for the fact that it is very, very, very hard to get all of your Zerglings going and attacking at the same time and not becoming a conga line that just gets annihilated. In fact, I think it is the hardest unit in the game to do that with because there's so many of them. You need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of APM, which is not the campaign experience. As a result, I'm actually going to drop the Zergling down to B tier. These are the highest DPS per dollar unit. They actually are pretty durable for the amount that they get. But at the same time, if you do not properly control them, on a lot of missions, you will just look at a pool of blood at the beginning of the opponent's base as you lose 100 of these guys, because it is hard to Zergling. It genuinely is. The Hydralisk, on the other hand, is the first Zerg S tier. You get the Hydralisk on mission 1, and you can very easily, it's not a challenge, it's not a feat of amazingness or anything, you can beat every single macro campaign mission by only making Hydras, and it just works. It wouldn't be an interesting challenge run video. It's just, the unit is the perfect blend of being very cheap, very accessible, but also strong enough per unit that it's very easy to get like 5 control groups of them and move them. Much easier than like the equivalent 20 control groups of Zerglings for the same cost and get them going. They hit ground, they hit air, they have pretty nice range, and they are responsive. For some reason in the StarCraft engine, the Hydralisk actually moves really well. It goes where you want, it paths really decently, it's not frustrating. So Hydra, easy S tier. Infested Terran, on the other hand, is going to be the first D tier. This unit it's cool. I really wish it was more fun, because every time that you get one, you then proceed to blow up a bunch of your own stuff, because when they die, they do AoE damage. What do? Do you just send one forward and then it gets killed? Or do you send a bunch forward and then one detonates and it all chain reacts? It is an immensely frustrating experience and very sad. I wish this unit was good, and we see in RTS development overall that the Baneling type unit becomes more common where it does not do friendly splash damage. And that is for a reason. And that reason is, this guy just sucks. He's a lot of work to get, and that work is not worth it. The Muta is pretty good. Muta is another unit that if you were playing a competitive, you'd put in S tier, because it comes out fast, it hits really hard, and you can micro it really well. Of course, the enemy starting with a ton of static defense, and the fact that campaign missions do not reliably have gas at every base, means that minerals are much more common, and more mineral-heavy units get the advantage, like the Hydra. However, the Muta does fly, and very similarly to the Wraith, if you get maybe 30, 40 of them, you can kind of just barrel over most things. They do get AoE'd every once in a while, and that really hurts. It's very sad. It is the type of thing that, you know, it happens, and usually Zerg can recover from it. But yeah, I think that the Muta is a solid A tier. It's not perfect, but it does a lot of things very well. The Lurker is interesting, because the Siege Tank obviously is the most comparable unit to it. The Siege Tank is an easy S tier, but the Lurker's got a couple things going not as well for it that I think make it dip. The first is that obviously it's only available in Brood War, so that's a big hit because it can't defend you on half of the missions. The second is that it's available pretty late in Brood War. I don't think it's not super late, but it's like the halfway point. And the third is that it doesn't have as much range. It doesn't have as much range at all. You can do some really great stuff, for example, putting them on the end of a bridge and the opponent will just get massacred. But the combination of those things and the fact that Sunks and Spores are amazingly good, they are so much better than Bunkers, means that I think the Lurker is a fantastic defensive unit that is not as good as the Siege Tank, and I'll put it in A tier. This is going to be an interesting hot take. I think the Devourer in the campaign is actually C tier. It's not D. Devourer is arguably one of the worst units in StarCraft. It's really far down there in competitive, in skirmish play. But I do think that if you're just running around with like 12 Guardians and 12 Devourers, for the most part, it's probably going to work out. You just A-move the Guardians around, and then the Devourers, you just click on all the air stuff and just kind of play with them only. And it works. It's a reasonable composition. It's mostly because the Guardian is really good, but the Devourer is on the same tech path, it takes the same upgrades, etc., etc. So I think that you can really get some value out of them in a way that you cannot in any other game mode. So it's not exceptional, though. I don't want to oversell it. As I said, the reason that it's so good is because the Guardian is an amazing siege unit, and I think it deserves an easy A tier. It's expensive and high-tech, and it is vulnerable to air attacks, but, it does not care about a lot of things. You get a bunch of Hydras under them, or Devourers, or Mutas, and it is just going to blast the majority of things in the game. There's not that many long-range things that can fire back at it, so the enemies it can push ground units away, and then the things that can attack it have to get up close, and the other guys just take them out. It's a very slow, steady, and consistent way to win missions. The Scourge is interesting. I'll be honest, I don't really like it in the campaign. It's very gas heavy, and as we talked about, gas is not nearly as readily available in the campaign as it is in skirmish mode. And the enemy gets all their stuff for free. So if you kill a battlecruiser with a couple Scourge, well, it didn't actually cost the enemy anything. They're already building another one. I think the units that just keep attacking are better. Maybe it deserves B tier. No, it's also hard to use. So I think the reason that it's going to be on the same tier as the Devourer, even though the Scourge is better, is Devourers are far, far more convenient to use. Scourge are a pain in the butt. You have to be good with them. You have to be able to like split them properly so you're not blowing up 50 Scourge on one unit with a bunch of overkill. You have to make sure that you're controlling all of them, not running them into a missile turret where they instantly die. They can do a lot of powerful stuff. Sometimes, rarely. As opposed to the Devourer, which is not nearly as powerful, but it is very reliable. So I'm gonna say C tier, but the Devourer is low C and the Scourge is high C. Not the drink though, not the drink. The Devourer, or the Defiler. Sorry, I'm Devourer pilled at this point. I've convinced myself it's the best unit in the game. It's just going to start rising up the tier rank every time I raid a new unit. Devourers aren't that bad, guys. No, Defiler. I think the Defiler deserves A tier. It's another unit that is one of the best units ever. I've said this before, and a lot of people have said this. Dark Swarm is one of the best abilities, straight up. It is expensive though, it's hard to tech to, and you need to get a lot of upgrades. Also, I don't think it's as good defensively as it is in multiplayer, because in multiplayer, what you want to do a lot of the time is on the top of a ramp, you get a couple lurkers stacked on top of each other, and then you Dark Swarm the top of it, and it is effectively unbreakable. Completely and totally unbreakable, particularly by Terran. However, that sort of setup doesn't exist nearly as much in the campaigns because there's often these wide open spaces that lead to the bases. Having these thin ramps is very rare. So I don't think it's as good because of the map design. However, throwing down a couple Dark Swarms before you charge in, it'll save you a 40-50 supply. It's so good. It is so good. I also think that Plague isn't that good in the campaigns. One of the things about Plague, it does 300 damage over a pretty long duration. And if you are playing multiplayer, that either drains all the opponent's repair money, or it drains all their medic energy, which makes the next fight very easy. There's not really that level of time in the campaign. If you hit someone with Plague, they're never going to disengage or something. They're just going to YOLO into you because they're the AI. As a result, the Plague does like 14 damage before the fight is over, and it's not ideal. But Dark Swarm is fantastic, specifically for attacking, and as a result, I think it deserves A tier, particularly because it has infinite energy with Consume. It's a little bit fiddly to use, but it is still the Defiler. I guess the Overlord is here. You know what? We can rate the Overlord. I like the Overlord. The Overlord, I think, is going to be a B tier because it is just reasonable, reliable detection. In the same way that it's nice that the science vessel is pretty bulky, the Overlord is very accessible as a form of detection, and the only reason that it's up here is so that I can place the observer lower, and I can rage about it later. I mean, nobody loves making Overlords, but nobody hates it either. You're always like, yeah, this is somewhat useful. Ah, the Queen. I really like the Queen, and I think that I am going to overplace it right now by putting it in C tier. Spawn Broodlings cost way too much energy. The unit is kind of expensive, and it doesn't do anything that the Defiler can't. Like, the thing that you want to do with Spawn Broodlings is snipe siege tanks. And it's just easier to do that with a Defiler. You just put Dark Swarms down and walk up to the siege tank instead. But at the same time, they're very fun. And I think fun does matter. It's just really cool doing the chest burster thing. Ensnare is garbage, and Parasite is probably the most inconsistent ability in the game against the AI. You have no idea if it's going to do anything useful. But it is fun to put on like critters and stuff sometimes. I think it entirely deserves C tier simply because it's fun. You know, it's not actually good, but you can do some very fun things with it. Another unit that's fun, but because it does good things, is the Ultralisk. I'm putting it in A tier. It is big Zergling. And in this game, 12 Ultralisks with full upgrades, you can kind of just let them run havoc, and as long as there's not a bunch of air units, they will win. That's just what they do. They will win. It doesn't really matter what the opponent has because they're not going to have it for much longer. These things do not die. They don't do area damage. They're kind of a slow and steady destroyer, but they are very steady in the way that they do it, and you actually unlock them pretty early in the campaigns, like weirdly early for a late tier tech unit, which is nice. All right, we have moved on to the Protoss. Zealot is A tier. Wow, we have a lot of A tiers, don't we? I mean, that just says that there's a lot of good StarCraft 1 units. I don't think any of these are misplaced. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of good StarCraft 1 units. The Zealot is really nice because unlike the Marine and the Zergling, you get a lot of bang for your control group. And StarCraft 1 Zealots with the leg upgrade, they're like Ultralisks. They're like mini Ultralisks. If the Ultralisk, in fact, I think that it's more appropriate to say that the Ultralisk is a big Zealot than it is a big Zergling. It's just one is Zerg and the other isn't. But these two fill very, very similar roles, and they're both very good at it. The Zealot being available from the beginning, too, is just fantastic. You're never sad wasting your minerals on a Zealot because it's not a waste. The Dragoon, on the other hand, this might be a bit contentious, but I'm going to put it in B tier. And that's because they're frustrating. They can do really well if you have them behind a bunch of Zealots and you have them in the right position and they're shooting all the stuff from behind, doing a lot of damage. It's very good and cool. But my dude, it is so frustrating to get them to do that thing. And often by the time that you've like got them in the position doing what you want, where you want, when you want, like the Zealots are dead or something, or they've won the fight if you have too many of them. A lot of the time they just kind of show up and they're like, I'm here to fight, guys. And it's been like over for 3 hours. They do good when they're there though. It's just they're only slightly more mobile than the photon cannon, which is... they basically are a walking photon cannon, but I just wish they would walk the direction I tell them to. High Templar is a tough one. Because when Psystorm slaps, it really, really slaps. But Hallucination is useless. The unit has no durability. It's really slow. The enemy does not stack up nearly as much as they do in StarCraft 2, or, once again, in competitive. And... I don't know. I might put the High Templar in C tier. I just don't think it feels that good to use in the campaigns. I can't think of many times where the Templar is like this unit that I'm like, yeah, I'm Templaring, boys. It's more like the, yeah, I kind of wish this was a Reaver. No, I'm going to pop it up. Storm does. It is so good when it works, and you can play defense with them, which is nice, because they do slot really well between photon cannons. So if you're building a bunch of cannons with a bunch of Templar to defend, That works super well. And I think that they do deserve B tier for that, because it's very similar to bunkers and a siege tank in that way. Just not nearly as good. Dark Templar, on the other hand, I think is A tier. Like, why defend with photon cannons and stuff like that when you can have a couple DTs that'll just cut through everything? I love defensive DTs, man. They're not always the best on aggression, because the Protoss fight a ton of Zerg, and the Zerg just always have overlords everywhere. They're really good at that. So it can make the aggression very tough. But it makes the enemies stopped in their tracks all the time when it comes to defending. You don't get them early, though. You don't get them often, and they are expensive. So they're definitely low A tier, but they are A tier. Is the Archon A tier? I don't think it is. I think that the Archon is a little bit too expensive to be A tier. However, I do think that it should be somewhat combined with the High Templar as well, because, you know, you drop a storm, you morph into an Archon, that sort of a thing. So I would put them together for fairness' sake. I do think the Archon's pretty good, though. I like Zealot Archon as a composition with a couple Dragoons. It tends to be very good at just breaking a formation at pretty low cost. You don't have to get a lot of tech out. And it can really, really stabilize you in the early and mid points of a game as you're trying to tech up more and more. So yeah, I like it. I like the Archon quite a bit. It's not a game-breaking unit because its range is so short, but it is pretty nice. The Dark Archon it's fun, man. It's really fun. It's not as good as StarCraft 2. We all know that. Mind control in StarCraft 2 is completely imba. The Dark Archon mind control, on the other hand, is 1, harder to use, 2, removes all of your shields when you use it, and 3, takes a long time to get set up. And it's very expensive, and you don't get it for a long time. But it allows you to do things that no other unit in this game can, and that is playing multi-faction stuff when you want to. And as a result, it has to be A tier simply because it allows playstyles that nothing else in the game can. And that is enjoyable, that is fun, and that is what the campaign should be about. However, there is a unit that is not enjoyable, not fun, and not what the campaign should be about, and that is the Observer. I hate the Observer, it's so stupid. The only reason it's not D tier is because it's cloaked. It is so annoying to use, they always die. The opponent always has another Spore Crawler, you know? You accidentally box your army, and then it's inside of that box, so it runs forward and dies. Then it's dead. You don't have any other form of mobile detection. The opponent has lurkers, and you're just like, oh, I don't want to be here anymore. Protoss detection sucks. It's always sucked. This is the reason Storm is actually good, is because you can just storm the ground where a lurker is, and you'll get it most of the way dead. It's ridiculous. I don't know how they didn't make a second detector with Brood War. The shuttle is interesting. I think that it's better than the dropship, simply because there are better missions in the Protoss campaign in order to use them, and the things that you can drop tend to be better. For example, we're going to talk about the Reaver next. It is significantly better to put like 2 Zealots and a Reaver in a shuttle, or 2 Reavers in a shuttle, than it is to put any Terran unit in a shuttle. The amount that you can just kind of fiddle around with a Reaver and a shuttle and just clear out a lot of random stuff is very nice, particularly stuff like perimeter defenses. The shuttle's also very quick when you have the speed upgrade, so you can get past a lot of stuff that the dropship cannot. So it's definitely better, but it's not like a game changer. The Reaver, I think, is a game changer. In competitive play, you basically always need a shuttle with your Reavers, but like, I don't think you do. I don't think you do at all in the campaign. You can just get a couple Reavers and kind of just walk them forward and just keep hitting the Scarab button over and over and over. And it's good, man. It's really good, and it's fun, and everything dies. And if you're not super good at spending your money, it's kind of an upside for the Reaver, right? It's kind of an upside. I enjoy the unit a lot, and I think it's just fantastically consistent. It's also one of those things you can just leave AFK in your base with like 2 cannons, and the large majority of enemy attack waves will go away without you noticing, as long as you remember to rebuild the Scarabs after the attack happened. They're good. Corsair, I think, is bad. There's just not that many times that you want a Corsair stuff. Disruption Web is good, but it costs so much money. You need a fleet beacon for it, and you have to get 200, and I think it's 125 energy. It's a strong ability, but it's kind of like the Queen Spawn Broodlings, where it's not worth the investment. And I think that it's particularly bad because I'm gonna say something that is gonna be another one of those, is Grant okay? Does he need professional help type things? Because I think the Scout is A tier, guys. The Scout's kind of good. It's way too expensive. It is really, really, really expensive. And the reason that people say that it's bad is because it is too expensive. So if you're trying to get one out in a hurry in order to do something, like maybe you're at threat of dying in a multiplayer match, yeah, it's terrible because it costs too much. But their anti-air is phenomenal. Their anti-ground is okay. And they are so ridiculously durable. If you, they clear stuff. They just keep clearing and clearing and clearing and clearing, and they never ever die. It's never the most efficient way to play, but you get you get them really early too. You get them on mission number 3, which is crazy fast. And for the mid part of every campaign, you can just go scouts. Really until the late game, and even in the late game, big scout energy is not that bad. But I would say basically until carriers come online, if you want to only scout, it works surprisingly well. Assuming that you have the money for it, and assuming you have the patience for it. That is the big thing. You gotta be willing to take 25 minutes before you attack to build up the scout ball, but nothing breaks it. It's weirdly good. Carriers are better though. If you're going to build up the scout ball, you might as well build up the carrier ball. The only reason they're on the same tier is because mission 3, not mission 3. Carriers are a very late game unit. Also, they're more fiddly. The scout does have the benefit of being a set and forget kind of unit. You just kind of attack move with them and they just fire their photon blasters at stuff. The carrier, you have to build so many interceptors for all the time. It's a pain in the butt. It's a good pain in the butt. However, the inconvenience factor is why it is lower than the battlecruiser. I also think it's just not as good as a battlecruiser. Yeah, like the battlecruiser is a unit where when you spend extra attention on it to do stuff like Yamato, you get rewarded for it. But the carrier, on the other hand, just has an upkeep cost. You just have to keep doing this thing, otherwise the unit stops being a unit, which really sucks. I think the Arbiter is A tier. Man, we have a lot of A's. Yeah, I think the Arbiter is also A tier because it is very similar to the Medic in the way that you do not have to do anything with it in order to make it good. It can just be inside of your army control group and it passively applies that cloak, which is so strong. So strong. You don't need to be good at stasising. You don't need to be good at recalling. You don't even need to remember to get those upgrades. The fact that you have an invisible army with a very durable unit that is providing that invisibility, which is probably the most important part. These things can take so many hits and I don't know why. I do not know why they are so durable. They're a fantastic unit. And if you do use all their abilities, they're probably like the Protoss S tier. They're so good. But you don't even need to. You don't even need to put them on follow or anything. You just have them in the control groups and they do their thing. They are expensive though. They're really expensive. Do I drop them down to B because of how much of a pain in the butt it is to get them out? No, nah, it's my tier list. I like Arbiters. And then finally, we have Workers. I don't know, dude. I don't want to put Workers in S tier because that's really boring, but they are the best units in the game. I'm gonna... whatever. Just pretend there's a tier under here for the Worker. And the Broodling was just here. He's just along for the game, or for the ride. Unfortunately, this tier list has taken more than whatever it is, 20 seconds to make, so this guy's actually dead. He's gone, so we can't place him anywhere. So that is it. That is my tier list. This is probably the highest tier list that I've ever made. The highest number of things in A tier. And I think that's partially because units in StarCraft 1 are very well designed. There aren't a whole lot of vulnerabilities or holes inside of the factions. They're very complete, and the units do a lot of things very well, or they're really good at their specialization. Overall, yeah, I think this is a pretty reasonable place for everything. My friends, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Remember, this is campaign only, so when you inevitably see someone having a meltdown in the comments, please remind them of that. And I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.